Morning, everyone. Welcome to Wisconsin Literacy's Winter Conference. I'm Jake Gerges, and I'm thrilled to be the new Executive Director of Wisconsin Literacy. Not to go too deep into my years before here, but for nearly 2 decades, I lived and breathed adult education. I started as an intern, went on to be an instructor, moved to creating program, and during that time, I've gained a deep understanding of the complexities involved in nonprofit work. And I have to say, to get everybody on one call, I'm delighted to see so many professional educators, tutors, volunteers, and supporters joining us from across the state. We're all united for a common mission, empowering individuals through literacy. This conference is about enriching your experience and diving into the critical topics that shape the future of literacy in Wisconsin. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, you'll find valuable resources and insights to enhance your practice and support your learners. But I want to take a moment to express the gratitude for the work that you do every day. From recruiting dedicated tutors to crafting engaging strategies for diverse learners, your commitment opens up doors to countless individuals seeking to improve their life through literacy skills. Your efforts transform lives. They pave the way for stronger families, communities, and are critical to the local economies. Through your dedication, refugees are better prepared, workplaces thrive, and individuals unlock their potential. This conference isn't just about exchanging ideas, it's about building stronger bridges and brighter futures through the power of literacy. Here, you'll gain the tools and knowledge to amplify your impact. The conference topics include recruiting top tutors, igniting the potential of English language learners, empowering newcomers with the resources like the Refugee Community Education Video Library, bridging gaps by equipping learners with virtual workplace skills, forging strong partnerships with employers and communities, gaining data-driven insights with the new TABE online reports, and cultivating lifetime learners by exploring the diverse offerings of the Read Life bookshelf. Through these sessions, I encourage you to actively participate and ask questions and network with your peers. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and experts eager to share their knowledge and learn from your experiences. Remember, we are stronger together. By collaborating and exchanging ideas, we can ensure that everyone in Wisconsin has the opportunity to thrive. Again, I am so happy that you're all here together. Let's unlock the transformative power of literacy for all. And I got through my speech, so at this time, I'm going to introduce Ashley, the Associate Director at Wisconsin Literacy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jake, for that great intro, and welcome to Wisconsin Literacy. We are excited to have you and excited to have all of you join us this morning. If you are a Kansas City Chiefs fan, you're especially happy on a Monday. And if you're a 49ers fan, perhaps a little extra coffee for you today. But anyway, thank you for joining us. And it's my pleasure to introduce Hannah Mackley, the Community Learning and Engagement Training Lead with Rogers Behavioral Health. Hannah has been with Rogers for 6 years. She has a clinical background and is a skilled facilitator and trainer, and received her bachelor's in psychology from UW in Stevens Point here. Her session, which kicks off our conference, is Compassion Resilience. In this hour-long interactive presentation, Hannah will lead us into a deeper look at the cycle of compassion fatigue, what's behind that fatigue, and help us begin to explore strategies to put into place that support compassion resilience and our own well-being through the Compassion Resilience Toolkit. So Hannah, thanks so much for leading us off.
Thanks, Ashley. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. It is bright and early on a Monday morning, and that in itself takes quite a bit of self-compassion to get yourself to do. So thanks for being here. Like Ashley said, my name is Hannah. I use she, her pronouns. And I've been with Rogers Behavioral Health now for almost 7 years. The first 3.5-ish years was in clinical work. So we worked in one of our residential programs for kids under the age of 14, doing cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure and response prevention, primarily focused in OCD and anxiety disorders. And amidst all of that, my husband was commuting 55 minutes to work one way. I was commuting 55 minutes to work another way, and we were pretty fatigued. At that time, then they decided to open a clinic here in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, which is where I'm based. And I said, well, cool, I'll move up there no matter what. And at the same time, this job happened to open up. And if I'm being fully honest, I kind of hit a point in my clinical career where I was at this fork in the road where I said, I don't know that I'm capable to do this, that this is the job for me. I feel stressed, burnt out, overwhelmed all of the time. And I really started to doubt whether or not I had the capability to do the work. And it was like all the stars aligned. And this job where I get to talk about this thing called compassion resilience and compassion fatigue opened up within my own system. And I stepped into this role then 3.5-ish years ago. And I've been doing it ever since, and I'm happy to keep doing it. So like Ashley mentioned, this is a pretty interactive thing. I'm going to do some talking at you from the beginning, and then I'd love to hear some responses from you. So in the chat or come off mute, whatever you feel most comfortable with, I welcome it. And if at any point you've got questions, feel free to hop off mute and ask them, interrupt me, that's just fine and dandy, or pop it into the chat and we'll make sure it gets addressed as well. So let's get started. All right. One of the core tenets of the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, which is that thing we're talking about today, is mindfulness and the ability to practice small moments of mindfulness as a means to boost our compassion resilience. So we're going to start with that. You may be coming in from other things, maybe still have other things up in your second screen or your own screen and multitasking. Let's just take 3 minutes here to settle ourselves in our space and get grounded in the moment that we're in. For me, this means I'm going to get both feet on the ground, my back all the way against the back of my chair, but please, you get comfortable as you see fit. And at any point during this, you need to participate in a different way, please do so. This is what's supposed to feel good and best for you. So if at any point my directions aren't jiving with you, please take a moment for yourself. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and get your eyes closed, or at least lower your gaze. Get your eyes off the screen. And as you do so, turn your attention towards your breath. There's no need to change its pace or get critical about what it feels like. Just notice where it's at in your body. Maybe you feel it most in your nostrils, or the back of your throat, the bottom of your lungs, or where your diaphragm flips when you take a breath. Just put all of your attention towards that spot. Now go ahead and let those distractions, those things that maybe will pull your attention away from this presentation over the next hour or so, let those things come to mind for you. Visualize them right in front of you. Maybe that's other emails, someone popping in your office. Maybe it's a to-do list that you're putting off in order to be here. Visualize those things and then visualize setting them outside of your space. Right behind me right now, I should say in front of me right now, is a large window. So I'm going to visualize putting those things outside of the window. I can still see them. I know they're still there. I'm going to be able to pick them up when I'm done. But for now, they're set aside. And then I'd like you to think about one intention you have for the next hour, hour and 20 minutes or so. One intention, what's one thing you'd like to focus on, set as a goal, center yourself around for our time together. And visualize that right here in your space with you. And with that intention close to you, we're going to turn our attention back to our breath. And we'll close out with 3 slow, deep breaths at your own pace. And when you're ready, come on back to the group. Roll out those shoulders, give a little stretch if you need to. Wiggle your toes. Thank you all for participating in that. Not only is it helpful to settle our own bodies, but it's helpful for me as a presenter to settle in my space before I start too. So thanks for spending those moments with me. A couple of goals for today. I want to make sure we understand what this thing we're talking about is, the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, and kind of give a high-level overview of what it is, how it can be useful to you, where it came from, all of that good stuff. And then I want us to start to explore one component of the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, which is this thing called the compassion fatigue cycle. And then what we can do, or what are some tools we can start to implement to combat some of the fatigue that we're naturally going to feel as humans. And then give you a chance to explore what this toolkit actually feels like and how you can begin to use some of that stuff today. The toolkit itself, Compassion Resilience Toolkit, comes from a long history of different things. I'm going to put in the chat here our website, eliminatestigma.org. If you go there, you will find a plethora of resources, but one of the programs you'll find is something called the Compassion Resilience Toolkit. We have 3 different versions currently. We have a schools version, a health and human services version, and a parent and caregiver version. Most of the activities I'm pulling from today comes from the schools version. And honestly, that one's pretty adaptable to any of those, any other professions that serve folks in some capacity. Between the health and human services and the schools one, you'll find tools that are applicable to all of you. And I would say about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago or so, Rogers Behavioral Health approached the founder of the toolkit, her name was Sue Mackenzie Dix, and said, hey, you're doing really great work within the Milwaukee area community, and we like what you're doing. We have a funder who wants to spend some money, which is a really, really privileged position for us to be in. And they said very candidly, we're not interested, we want to support youth mental health and schools. It's where the toolkit started, was based in schools. And yet we aren't really interested in the sort of traditional sense of giving money or philanthropy. So like they didn't want to open another clinic or expand our programming. They wanted to get a little bit creative. Sue Mackenzie Dix was a brilliant woman, is a brilliant woman. And she said, I know what we need to do. If we want to support youth mental health, we need to support the mental health, well-being, and compassion of those that serve those people. And thus the Compassion Resilience Toolkit was born. It's a 12-section toolkit, like I mentioned, in those 3 areas, but applicable to many different spaces, that offer different activities and conversations that help support building a culture of compassion. So there's tools on an individual level, things that you can do as an individual to help build your resilience and compassion. There's things on a team level. How do we support each other in reaching those goals? And then there's things at a systems level. What things at a system level need to be in place to support our well-being, to support our culture of compassion? It's informed with an equity and trauma lens. And at its core, there's this belief about human behavior. It truly is rooted in this idea that humans do well when they have the resources. Oftentimes, when we feel burnt out, fatigued, stressed, or overwhelmed, it's easy for us to look at someone we're working with, helping support, serve, or care for, and say, well, if they just wanted to get better bad enough, then they would. If they would try hard enough, we wouldn't be in this position. And yet we know that most people are rooted in the idea that when they have the right supports, they can do well. So the Compassion Resilience Toolkit is built to help keep people in that school of thought that people do well when they have the right supports. If things aren't going right, it's probably because there's a barrier in the way. And how do we help work together to break that down? The other really key informative piece here was that as we started to think about how we support the people who support others, there was this constant nod to the idea that trauma-sensitive care or being open to other people's stuff, which by nature a lot of you do in your job, there was an unintended consequence that came along with that. And it's that we opened our hearts to care for others, and there weren't tools or skills put in place to help protect our hearts. So folks that serve others started talking about things like secondary trauma, burnout, not being able to give the same amount of compassion to the people who need it most, simply because they needed to protect their own well-being. And so the toolkit then comes in to say, let's help build skills that keep our hearts really open to continue to do the jobs we do, support the people we do, and attend to our own well-being, be able to do it in a way that protects us as well. Questions about the background of the toolkit, where it comes from? Awesome. I should mention as well that toolkit, if you go to eliminatestigma.org and click on the program, all of it is there and completely free for you to use. You can take any tools from it and use it as you need. Maybe it will support a family that you're working with. Maybe it's going to support yourself or your own well-being. Any of it is there for you to take and use as you feel necessary. What you'll find in all 12 of those sections are 3 different parts: an introduction piece, a key activities piece, which is going to have a guiding agenda or a circle agenda. That's basically an outline for you to be able to have conversations or engage in activities with people that you work with around these topics. And then there'll be a links to other resources section as well that have some external links to things that support the content we're talking about in those sections. The toolkit itself is, like I said, those 12 different sections. The first 3 work on giving us a common language. First, it's how do we act with compassion? What does it mean to actually show up compassionately towards each other? Then what do we do? How do we show compassion towards ourselves? The third component then is the cycle of fatigue, where we're going to spend a good chunk of time together today. The fourth is what's driving our fatigue, which we'll talk a little bit about. The fifth then is expectations. What we find is that oftentimes when we talk about the things that drive our fatigue, they're strongly correlated to unrealistic, unstated, or unreasonable expectations we have for ourselves or for other people. So we get really clear about expectations. And if we've got expectations, we're going to have boundaries put into place. So we talk a bit about boundaries. We'll talk about both of those things today and do a couple activities with those. And then the second half of the toolkit, or the last chunk, really focuses on individual well-being. And we'll play with one of those activities today too. So I've said compassion resilience a whole bunch of times now. I want to give you the actual definition in the toolkit. Excuse me. Compassion resilience is simply the power to return to a position of empathy, strength, and hope after the daily experiences of the challenges our children face and those we serve. Excuse me. Let me start that sentence over. Compassion resilience is the power to return to a position of empathy, strength, and hope after the daily experiences of the challenges our children and those that we serve face as their caregivers, as those who serve them in some capacity. It requires us to be able to find optimism in an imperfect world. So a long definition is that power to return to a position of empathy, strength, and hope. And in short, it's to be able to find optimism in an imperfect world. And so let's talk a little bit about compassion fatigue. If we know what compassion resilience is and our goal is to get there, we got to talk about what compassion fatigue actually is. I'm just going to put all of our spots up here. When we sat down to write this part, we said we really want this to be evidence-based and rooted in research. We know that folks are burnt out, stressed, and overwhelmed, look a little bit like that zombie cat, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. And yet we also know that folks don't get there overnight, and it doesn't happen in a silo. There's things that contribute to it. And so we wanted to be able to understand, how do people end up there? How do we end up in that stereotypical idea of burnt out, stressed, and overwhelmed, where people are deciding to leave their job entirely? So we partnered with Dr. Eric Gentry, who is a stigma researcher based out of the Chicagoland area. And he set out to find what this compassion fatigue path could look like. To do that, he worked and surveyed folks in all sorts of serving capacities. So yes, teachers, yes, therapists, yes, doctors, but also like construction workers who provide a service for someone else, servers and bartenders, customer service reps, retail service areas, anyone who is providing a service of some capacity to someone else. He tried to include in his research. And what he found is that regardless of the service or care that you're providing, there's some similar stages to fatigue that occur. And that first stage then is the zealot stage. It's the one up here at the top. Let me take a step back 1 second. Dr. Eric Gentry, I've met him now a couple of times. He's an incredibly academic, very professional man. And I promise you, nowhere in any of his peer-reviewed journals are there pictures of cats at all. We just really like them and thought they're pretty cute, and they help us remember the stages. So we add them in with his blessing, but definitely not in his very academic professional settings. So anyways, that zealot stage is the one up top. Oftentimes we see folks in a zealot stage who's new to their position. They've taken on a new initiative. They've started a new role. They feel pretty jazzed about whatever is going on with them in their workplace. They're committed, they're involved, they're available. And most importantly, they say yes to a whole lot of things. And for a couple of reasons. One, they feel excited and they're ready to go. Two, it feels good to be able to say, yeah, I can take that off your plate, or totally, I'll be the one to do that. It feels good to be the go-to person to get stuff done. And yet, what we know is when we stay in this space for too long, we take on too many things, our to-do list becomes too long, it's incredibly fatiguing. It also can feel fatiguing to be the one that's depended on all of the time, or pretty isolating to feel that way. So the zealot stage might sound like a good idea, like our goal is to get back to there where we can take on more things. And in fact, that's not the goal, but I'll come back to that here in a little bit. From the zealot stage, we can move into irritability. This is where maybe those rose-colored glasses that we had when we first started the role or first started the new project come off. And maybe your coworkers aren't as fun as you thought they would be, or the remote job isn't as freeing as you had hoped. Those rose-colored glasses come off. We start to see the imperfections that naturally occur in any workplace because nothing is perfect. And we start to see things like anger and cynicism, diminished creativity, that feeling of helplessness or hopelessness start to increase. And we just are a little bit spicy. Like it feels a little good to snap at folks when they ask you to do something or why something isn't done, because we're just kind of over it. We're a little irritable at this point. And from there, we move into withdrawal. From an equity and trauma standpoint, withdrawal occurs when your body is continually exposed to things that cause you harm or make you feel unsafe. And so your body says, I'm just not going to let you expose yourself to those things anymore. And a bit of this does happen in the workplace. If you continue to show up to an environment that stretches you too thin, that doesn't respect your own boundaries, that asks too much of you and you don't feel fulfilled in, your brain and body start to do the same thing where it says, well, I'm going to show up less and less as a safety and protective measure. And so we see things like chronic exhaustion, actual physical illness. We struggle to empathize with other people and maybe even feel a little bit numb to their pain. Although we see absenteeism, like people show up less, we also see presenteeism where people are just there. They're not actually there, but they are just there. And from there, then we can move into this zombie stage. This is just this sense that you can't ever do enough, but you have to do all of the things. And if you don't do them right now, no one else is going to do them. But also, if you were to try to give it to someone else, it wouldn't matter because they couldn't do it the way that you could do it. And if we don't get it all done right now, the entire building is going to blow up in smoke for sure. It's this massive sense of importance and yet this massive sense of persecution at the same time. We've put up our blinders. We're a one lane, one track show. And we forgot that we maybe have a team of support around us. And we can fall into that place because maybe we're forced to be into that place at some point in life as well. But what happens is we can't sustain this sort of model. We can't continue to go through this cycle of stages. And I bet you can pause and think about right now where you're at currently. What are you experiencing currently? And what happens then is we go through these cycles, and maybe you started at zealot this morning, and by the end of the day, you're a zombie. And maybe you'll go bounce back to withdrawal or irritability. And you go around this. At some point, if we don't have the tools and strategies put into place, we find ourselves at a fork in a road. Just like you heard me say at the very beginning, I found myself at a fork in the road where I have to make a choice. Do I continue to go through this cycle where I feel burnt out, stressed, overwhelmed, a general sense of being unwell, and start to ask myself whether or not this is the role for me? What we know from the research is that people who are in some sort of serving capacity, they end up leaving 50%, over 50% end up leaving their profession within the first 5 years of them being in it, because they found themselves at this fork in the road. They didn't have the tools put into place, and they said, it must be me. It must be something about my ability and my tools that I have. So I have to choose. Do I continue down this path of being unwell, or can I get myself out of this cycle entirely? Not back up to zealot to continue to do it again, not back into irritability to fall back into zombie by the end of the day. Can I pull myself out of this cycle of fatigue entirely by putting the right tools and supports into place? Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind. It is entirely normal and absolutely expected that you will be one of those cats at some point. It's a normal response to complex circumstances and situations. And the people that you serve come with their own stuff and expose you to it every single day. And your body will only let you take on so much. So it is a normal response for you to feel those things. It's okay. It's not about trying to get us to never be fatigued. If you figure out the antidote to that, let us know, because you'd put us out of business. But it's about how we can prevent and intervene to lessen the impact of the fatigue along the way. If we go back to that cat cycle really quick, you can also see in each of these stages how our ability to act compassionately towards ourselves, towards others, to the people that we serve, might start to diminish or have some impact there. So even in the zealot stage, if our to-do list is 96 miles long, we might not even be able to pull our head out of the to-do list to notice that someone's experiencing some kind of pain or needs our help or support, or that our self is struggling. If we're in that irritability stage, oftentimes it sounds like you think you got problems. Have you seen what I'm dealing with lately? And when we're in that withdrawal phase, we just simply don't have it to give to someone else. We can't give the support to anyone else anymore. And in that zombie phase, it just, like I said, your blinders are up. You're only paying attention to what you've got on your plate. There's no room for anyone else to come in. So if we're saying the ability to act with compassion is kind of the key to being able to build a compassionate culture to support our own well-being, it's important that we've got things in place to be able to combat that compassion fatigue cycle. Any questions or thoughts lingering for anyone here before we move into our first sort of, what do we do about compassion fatigue? All right. You heard me mention at the beginning this idea about self-compassion, and it is the first and foremost antidote or key to helping build resilience. Self-compassion comes from, or where we take self-compassion from, we pull on the work of Dr. Kristin Neff. And if you haven't checked her out, you really, really should. Neff, if you just Google her name, you'll come up to her website. She's got loads of resources on self-compassion. How do we actually give compassion towards ourselves? If our job is to be compassionate to other folks, we definitely need to be filling our own cup up just a little bit. She defines self-compassion in these 3 areas: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. I'm going to go from right to left on the screen here and start with that mindfulness component. When a reflection question for you here as we start to think about this. The last time you felt like you made a mistake, dropped the ball, didn't meet someone's expectations, fell short in some capacity, what did your automatic internal dialogue sound like? You don't have to share. I just want you to think about what was that initial automatic self-dialogue we heard. Most of the time when people do share out, we hear things like, how did you do that? Come on, like, get it together. How could you be so silly? Or whatever it may sound like. It doesn't sound super kind all that often. And that's okay, because it means that we're probably pretty human, and it means we have some care as to why that thing didn't happen. Mindfulness is just to notice that internal struggle, to recognize that I'm feeling guilt, shame, and maybe whatever other negative emotion that may come with falling short or not meeting someone's expectation. And we want to allow ourselves some space just to feel it, to let it be. Instead of being reactive or harsh towards ourselves, can we just acknowledge that, yeah, I don't feel great about how that went down? We said in the clinical world, when I was doing work with kids struggling with anxiety, like we would say all of the time, what we resist persists. So if you think about a kid struggling, maybe they have test anxiety. So they're avoiding going to school to take the test. They're resisting the anxiety that's going to come from the test. Guess what? When you show up tomorrow, the test is still going to be there. The expectation is still that you're going to have to take the test. So what we resist persists. And the same is true for those kind of stereotypically negative emotions that come with falling short. If we resist or kind of push away or pretend we don't feel the guilt, the shame, the anxiety about it, it just piles up, and we're going to have to come back to it at some point. And so we want to just allow ourselves a moment to be able to feel whatever is going on. Deb, in the chat here, I see your question, who's the resource or website for self-compassion? I'm going to type it in there. Kristen Neff is her name. And if you just give her a Google, I think it's a self-titled website, but you'll find it'll be like one of the first options that show up, Kristen Neff. The second component then she says about self-compassion, or the second key to it, is common humanity. It makes the mindfulness piece a little bit easier. If you can remind yourself that, guess what? I'm not alone in this feeling. I'm not the first person to drop this ball today. I probably won't be, because there's someone else in the world that's made the same mistake I have. And you're not alone. You're not perfect. So you're meant to make mistakes. Everyone is going to feel something like this at some point in their life. So if you can lean into the idea that I'm not alone in this feeling, it might make that mindfulness component just a smidge easier. Allow yourself to sit in it. And then the final piece is self-kindness. If that internal dialogue sounds harsh, can we challenge ourselves to meet ourselves with a little bit of love, a little bit of kindness, instead of being so self-critical? I often ask folks, if you wouldn't say that to your best friend who came to you and said, dang, I really made that big mistake, or dang, I really dropped the ball at work today. If you wouldn't say whatever your internal dialogue is saying to that person, it's probably not serving us any kind of good, because you wouldn't look at your best friend and say, well, how could you be so dumb to do that thing? Right? You just wouldn't. And so we want to be able to meet ourselves with the same kindness. If we can give ourselves just a little bit of self-compassion, it helps to build our resilience, because it makes that hardiness, that ability to return to a position of empathy, strength, and hope just a little bit easier, because we have the skills built within us. So the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to put a link from Dr. Neff's website into the chat here. This is her self-compassion scale. I often tell folks that this is the first opportunity you have to practice self-compassion as you complete the scale. So I want you to open it up, take a peek at it. I'm going to be quiet for just about 3 or 4 minutes here. As you start to take a look at it, you probably won't get through it all the way. The idea is not to get hard on yourself for the things you have room to grow in. It's to start thinking about, how can I improve my self-compassion? Where am I doing well? And maybe I don't even realize I'm doing well at that thing already. And how can we capitalize it? So it's 10:37 right now. I'm going to be quiet until about 10:40, 10:41. And then I'd love to hear from some folks, some thoughts or takeaways just from completing that, taking a look at it. What's one thought or reflection you have after starting to take a peek at that scale?
I'd like to add.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm not coming in live, but no, I saw the one about when I'm feeling kind of inadequacies or things that I'm going through in life, and I tend to isolate myself. But I realized that I do that not necessarily because I want to be away from everyone, but it's for, there's that part that protects me, but it's that time where I can focus on how I'm really feeling. So really just being in the moment. And so I tend to usually, I guess, in years ago, before the maturity, some of it came, the emotional maturity came, you tend to react, right? So I tend to isolate so that I can't react. And with that resilience, I find that when I'm in my space by myself, everybody deals with it differently, but in that isolation, I'm able to really be just mindful of how I'm feeling, what is actually present in the moment. And if I am hard on myself, I'm able to like kind of just talk myself through it. So instead of hearing what other people have to say on top of what I'm already dealing with. So that's kind of so a lot of it, it was a great question right there. But it would all kind of tied in together for me.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mhm.
And that isolation can be a helpful tool for us to be able to kind of turn inward and be reflective and use some of that time to really analyze what's going on. So thank you for that. I see lots of things in the chat here. I could use more self-compassion. Don't worry, Macy, most people can. I'm pretty hard on myself, especially when I don't succeed. Ashley, most people are. Things have changed as I age and I'm better at self-care. We see that a lot too, that as folks maybe feel more settled in who they are as a person and where they are in life, that some of those skills come a little bit easier. And it's a lot easier to be negative than it is to be positive. Yeah. Again, I just want to reiterate, all of these things are incredibly normal things, normal responses to have. Self-compassion is not a destination. It's a continual journey. It's something that we are always working towards. And I think a skill that we just is a lifetime development skill. We're always working towards it. One thing I do want to point out about that scale is that if you took that today and then you took it in 6 months, you might get completely different scores based on the things that are going on in your life and all of that kind of stuff. So although there is a scoring tool at the end there, don't hang your hat too much on what kind of score you get, because like I said, it'll be different the next time you take it based on whatever else is going on. So self-compassion is really one of those first tools, that kind of foundational tool for us to be able to help build our own resilience. The next thing I want to talk about here is expectations. If I were to ask you all to think about 2 or 3 things that drive your fatigue on a daily basis, so the stuff that makes it hard for you to show up 100% at work, that doesn't fill your cup up, that makes it hard for you to be your best self, what are those things? I'd love to see a couple in the chat. What are some of the things that drive your fatigue, don't fill up your cup, or make it hard for you to show up 100% yourself? Pop a couple of those into the chat. Trying to be there for everyone else all of the time. Work versus home, trying to find that balance. Unrealistic expectations, living in poverty. High standards for myself, winter weather, financial strain, small children, when coworkers are absent or lacking emotion, never saying no, long to-do lists with little time, team isn't supportive, my own health sometimes, not enough sleep, staying up too late, lack of support. Yeah. Not finding a place to physically get away from the office when it's necessary. Energy level, keep them coming in if you want. Thank you for sharing all of those. In some of these, what we'll find is that there is a level of, and we called it right out even too, we said unrealistic expectations. Some of these, a good chunk of them are going to be tied to some aspect of expectations that just aren't realistic for us. Let me get my screen shared here again. There we go. And then what we find happens is when we have a whole buttload of unrealistic expectations on our plate, talking about those expectations are another driver of fatigue. And so when we think about expectations, there's a few things in mind. They paint a picture for how we think things should be. And those shoulds, if they're unrealistic, unstated, unclear, fall to those right side of that slashes there on the bullets. They're really a barrier for growth, right? Those shoulds can get in the way rather than us feel like they're helping us be a better person. And so we want to get really clear about expectations and what expectations we have for each other and for ourselves. There's 3 important aspects that we need to make sure we have clear when it comes to expectations: the why of the expectation, the what of the expectation, and the how of the expectation. And I'm going to use a real life story here to explain why these things are so important. I was doing this work with a construction company, which sounds a little different some days than how I present on it in a typical day-to-day. But nonetheless, I was doing this work with a construction company. They were working really hard to build a solid foundation. They were struggling with some team dynamic stuff. There was quite a generational gap from the people that were leading the team to the people who were actually doing the work. And one of the things that they tried to put in place was, one of the leaders tried to put in place was this idea of having a daily huddle, where he asked folks to come to their shift 15 minutes before their shift started so that they could get a game plan for the day in place. So they could talk about who's doing what, where are project timelines at, what delays do they have, etc. All of the things that happen on a construction site. And he said, it's going really, really well. We've seen an increase in safety measures or a decrease in lack of safety measures or incidents happening. We've seen higher productivity. We see people able to communicate better with each other because they know what's happening where. And he said, but the one thing that keeps coming up is I'm constantly missing a couple of guys from the huddle. They aren't there on a regular basis. And I said, okay, well, if your expectation is that they're there 15 minutes before their shift starts, which is a whole thing in itself, but we don't need to go there today. Oh, excuse me. That's the what. We know what the expectation is. It's be there 15 minutes early so we can have this huddle. The why also was pretty clear. They saw the increased safety measures. They saw the decrease in incidences or accidents. They saw an increase in communication and productivity. Our why is pretty clear as well. So I bet there's something with the what then, or the how, excuse me, the how. And it turns out as he had a conversation with those folks about not being able to meet that expectation, they shared that they rely on public transportation to get to the work site each day. And there just simply wasn't a bus that was able to get them there 15 minutes early. And so, although the idea was there, the what was there, the why was clear, they hadn't worked out the how just yet. And so all 3 of those pieces are incredibly important for us to make sure we have transparency around, because when we don't, and one of those pieces are missing, it impacts our relationships with each other. That superintendent of the worksite was incredibly frustrated with those couple of folks for not showing up. He felt quite a bit of resentment because other people were able to make it happen. He set this expectation and he was clear as to what and why to do it. So why couldn't they? And those folks that couldn't get there felt resentment towards their leader for not checking in to find out why they hadn't been there. So that story really illustrates a couple of things. 1, those 3 pieces are really key for us. And 2, being able to talk about it is also incredibly important. So we're going to do an activity here together. Dottie, that's a really great question. If the huddle was being paid, I do believe so. But that was definitely part of the conversation that came up about being there 15 minutes early to begin with. Anyways, could we just do it at the start of when their shift was supposed to be, which is what they ended up doing. They just adjusted so that the first 15 minutes of the scheduled time was used for the huddle. But thanks for asking. Oop, oop, oop. We're going to do an activity here together. When, like I said, the most important thing about expectations is to get clear about what our expectations are for each other. So if we're looking to build a culture of compassion that supports our own individual well-being and resilience, we need to get really clear about what kind of things we want to say yes to, what behaviors, actions, thoughts support a culture of compassion and our own well-being. What things do we want to say yes to? So what I want you to do is either on a second screen or on your phone, open a browser and go to wooclap.com, WOOCLAP.com. I'll put it in the chat here too. And when that pulls up, you should see a thing that says enter this code, and you're going to put in QQKFGL. I'll put that in the chat too. KFGL. And when you think and you envision a culture of compassion, a place you want to show up to work at, what kind of things do you feel, see, what behaviors are happening, what do you expect from yourself, and what do you expect from others in order to uphold that culture of compassion? What kind of things do you want to say yes to? And once we start to get some answers in and folks into it, hopefully this works for me. If it's not working for folks, someone let me know, because sometimes technology just isn't our friend, but it should start to get some answers up on the screen here. There we go. I see flexible schedules, kindness, genuine, check-ins, understanding, teamwork, respect, being seen, growth, accountability, partnerships, harmony. They're moving like crazy, so I'm doing my best to read them. Being acknowledged, having fun, compassion, humor, listening, recognition. Great. Feeling appreciated, a growth mindset. Awesome. Keep them coming in. Understanding, saying yes, team building, active listening, collaboration, fun and humor, appreciation, problem solving. Keep them coming. What you can see here is that definitely there's some patterns usually. And when we do this with small teams, what we say is then let's get really specific about what behaviors show good listening, what behaviors show respect, that kind of stuff. Since you're all coming from different places, you can reflect on that independently. But once we know what we want to say yes to, those are our expectations. That's what we hope to show up within our workplace. That's what we need in order for our team to support our own well-being and for us to support our team's well-being. Getting clear about those expectations are incredibly important. Whatever they sound or look like for you and your team is going to vary, but being clear about them is incredibly, incredibly important. Because the next thing we have to do is talk about boundaries. If we've got clear expectations and things that we are saying yes to, there's going to be some things we have to say no to. Naturally, in order to uphold expectations, there have to be boundaries in place. Once I click to the next screen, if you still have that WooClap open, it should prompt you with another question. You get it going here for you. And now I want you to think, if you've got those yeses in mind, those things we just talked about, that giant word cloud, what things do you need to say no to or set a boundary around in order to say yes? What are the things you need to say no to in order to say yes? Micromanaging, negativity, taking on extra work, out of hours, unfairness, micromanaging, maybe I said that over time already. Email, just in general, let's just stop the emails. I love it, I wish. Toxic energy, things out of my scope, another meeting, comparison, disrespectfulness, drama, unfair compensation, assumptions, inefficiency, unfair workloads, yelling, saying yes to every task, passive aggressiveness, blame, another meeting, lack of kindness. Great, thank you. Yeah, in order just to keep those yeses, those things we said yes to as our priority, we've got some things to say no to. And that's where boundaries come into play. If we're looking to get ourselves out of that cycle of fatigue, let's just kind of recap where we've been here. We talked about that cycle of fatigue. We know what's going to happen. Our goal is to help pull us out of that fatigue and have skills in place in order to help us do that. The first step is that self-compassion piece, right? How do we show up for ourselves? The second piece then is to think about what are our expectations? And is there an area where our expectations, the lack of clarity, the unrealisticness of them are driving some of our fatigue? And what do we do about it? Well, then we get clear about it. Let's actually talk about what those expectations are and work together to come to a place where we all understand the why, the what, and the how of what they are. And how do we work together to meet those things? And then what do we have to say no to? If these are the things that we're saying, yes, this supports our culture of compassion, this supports our own well-being, these are the things we have to say no to. And guess what? No's mean boundaries. And that's some of the hardest, one of the hardest parts is actually being able to set a boundary and keep it in place. So we've got some tips to think about setting compassionate boundaries. The first thing we say, excuse me while I take a drink here quick. Thank you. The first thing we say is we want to know what we want to say yes to. So yes, we just did that activity together where you brainstormed with a culture of compassion, what those yeses are. But what do you have? What are your own values? What are your own priorities? What are the things that you are always going to say yes to? When you know what you want to say yes to, it becomes really a whole lot clearer to understand what we need to say no to, right? Because those yeses are always going to be, and the no's have to come in place to support those yeses. When we need to talk about boundaries or the lack thereof or whatever it might be, we want to be proactive in it. When I say have meetings, I don't necessarily mean you like go into Outlook and schedule a time that's called boundaries chat, but just that there's an awareness that we are going to be talking about it and we do it proactively. When there's some structure to the meeting, it offers some safety on both sides. Talking about boundaries isn't fun, and it can make people feel as if they've fallen short or whatever it might be. So when we offer some structure and safety and we do it in a proactive manner, hopefully it removes some of those negative feelings that are associated with boundaries. The third thing is we just say it. We use clear, direct communication, and we don't want to make them guess. So an example I use here is like, and this doesn't apply to everyone all of the time, but let's say I'm really working on not responding to emails after 6 p.m. and I'm continually getting emails from someone after 6 p.m. I feel the urge to respond, and there's a couple flaws with that idea, but let's just pretend that's what it is. I would want to make sure that I say, hey, Kimberly, you know, I'm working really hard on my work-life balance and being able to be the person I want to be for my family when I'm at home. I'm wondering if we could talk about what your expectations are for me for those meetings after 6 p.m. and if it would be possible to not even receive them. You hear clearly the yes there, which is I'm working really hard on my work-life balance and to be the best person I am for my family. And the no really is an ask, a conversation of like, can we talk about what's the expectation when you send me those emails after 6 p.m.? But ultimately you're really saying, I don't think I want to respond to those emails after that time outside of my work hours. But if I were to get really tricky about it and it were to sound something like, hey, Kimberly, I just throwing it out there. I don't really, it's like no big deal, I guess, but this kind of a big deal, but I'm really working on that thing where like, you know, you're at home, but I'm not at home. Then like I get an email from you and then I don't know what to do with it. And how do I know? So like, could we just, I don't know, maybe if you wouldn't send me an email, no one has any clue as to what I'm trying to say when I beat around the bush so much. We need that clear and direct language so that people aren't guessing or feeling like they aren't certain about what you're asking. When a violation of the boundary occurs, because it will, that's just how life is, it happens. We want to make sure that we reinforce by pointing out in the moment that a violation of the boundary has occurred. That doesn't mean you don't take time for yourself to feel whatever emotion, to sit with that emotion, that mindfulness piece we talked about, and respond in an appropriate manner rather than coming from the emotion. But we want to make sure that we point those violations out when they happen, because again, that feeling of resentment comes in with boundaries as well. let's say now that I've asked Kimberly not to email me after 6 p.m. and she agreed, but she continues to do it. And I wait, 9 or 10 times for it to happen before I finally say something. A couple things happen. One, I'm like, Kimberly, what the heck? We talked about this thing. And I'm now feeling resentful to Kimberly, who continues to cross a boundary. And by the time I bring it up to Kimberly, she's going to look at me and be like, Hannah, what the heck? Why didn't you just give me the reminder? Or why didn't you just bring it up again after the first time that this happened? So now we've got resentment on both sides, which is going to make this conversation a little bit more challenging. So let's just point it out when it happens right from the jump. We want to make sure that we give explanations that are specific and relevant to the other person, and that we work together to come to a shared solution. So maybe Kimberly's got 2 kids and one's at ballet and one's at softball and from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And that's the perfect time for her to be able to plow through some emails. Kimberly should be able to do that. It's that idea that we come together to have an understanding. The shared solution is that Kimberly can send me those emails. I know that she doesn't need my response until the next day or whenever my working hours start next. So coming together to figure out solutions and explanations that are specific and relevant to each other that work to be able to meet each other's expectations and respect each other's boundaries is really, really important too. And then we want to be able to back up our boundary with action. Listen, if I'm saying that I don't want to get emails after 6 p.m., I probably also shouldn't send emails after 6 p.m. All that does is invite people to ignore your own needs or not take your boundaries seriously. Because if I can't do it myself, why should they? And then finally, we want to remember our locus of control. When you think about some of the drivers of fatigue that came up, there were things on our list sometimes that require us, in order to tend to that thing, to say yes to things when we would really, really, really like to say no. Maybe it's in the best interest for your family. Maybe it's in the best interest for your health, your own well-being. Maybe it's something that like you just are in a situation where you can't say no to that thing. We want to remember our locus of control. They're not about perfections. And when you have to say yes in one area, where can we find some balance in another area? Where could we say yes, or maybe yes, but in other situations, in order to try and find that balance so that your boundaries can feel respected. And the other part about this is know that your yeses and nos can change. Something that's a yes today is maybe a no in a week from today. Or something that's a no today is maybe a no for now, but let's talk about what could come off of my plate in order for that to be a yes, or whatever it sounds like, right? Boundaries aren't about perfection, but if we don't have any, that's when we start to see issue. I've got a couple of reflection questions here on the screen for you. I'd just like you to pause and take a peek at. Oop, whoop, whoop. When you think about what your priorities or values are, what is one that strongly connects to your sense of purpose? If I give an example here for one of my own values is dependability, or feeling as though I can be depended on by other folks. It strongly connects to my own sense of purpose, probably, if I'm honest, because of a lot of stuff that I went through as I was growing up and didn't feel like I had tons of people I could depend on. So it's a core tenet of who I am. And so a boundary that I have to, the second question then, if I keep that yes as dependability, a boundary that I have to continually work to uphold or keep in place to keep me out of that place of resentment is when I say yes, I really truly mean it. Like I mean it in that I can do it to its fullest capacity in a way that you can depend on it. So I often have to say no. And I really have to hold myself to that. If this is something I don't feel I can do to the best of my ability because I've got too many other things, whatever it might be, I have to learn to say no. And it's something I always have to work on. So for your own reflection, on your own time, what's a personal yes for you that keeps a strong sense of purpose present? And what boundary or what thing do you need to say no to help keep you out of that place of resentment? And pause for a second while you reflect on that. All right, folks. Any questions, thoughts, things that are hanging out there about expectations, boundaries, anything we've talked about thus far? Okay. This last piece here, I'm going to pull from our individual well-being practices. This comes from section 9 of the toolkit. Our individual well-being practices are broken up into 4 quadrants, and they're based around the Wellness Compass, which comes from the Samaritan Family Hands Foundation in the Milwaukee area. And it breaks it up into the mind, the heart, spirit, and strength. And section 9 focuses on spirit, which is all about connecting back to why you're in this role to begin with, why you love to help people, why you do your job day in and day out. And so this question on the screen here is, when do you feel most alive, most like yourself? What are you doing and who are you with? I'd love to hear some voices or into the chat, excuse me, of when do you feel most alive, most like yourself? What are you doing and what are you up to?
Morning runs along the lakefront.
Thanks.
With friends.
With friends.
Anything having to do with the humanities, listening to music, dancing, reading books, going to movies, museums, etc.
Love it. Thanks, Cynthia. I see in the chat here real quick. Can I repeat the 4 quadrants? Absolutely. Mind, heart, spirit, and strength. We've got cuddling with cats, walking with my dog, listening to newly opened spring waters, meditation, prayer, creating something crafty, reading great fantasy books, doing yoga. Spending time with my parents, taking time for self-care, a hot bath, enjoying coffee while doing nothing else. Yeah. My answer to this question usually is anything with good friends and good food. Like if you give me a good bowl of pasta, I'm pretty okay for a while. Reading, meditating, prayer, spending time with my family, keep them coming in there. Sometimes seeing other people's ideas help us too. A couple things I want to point out. First is that we are intentional and that these individual well-being practices are at the end of the toolkit and they are rooted in those 4 quadrants because we know folks like you are over people telling you to make sure you engage in self-care. Please make sure you have a balanced lunch and take a good bubble bath at the end of the day and get your 10,000 steps in. And if you do all of those things, then everything else is going to be fine. And it does help. Those things are important. You should make sure you have balanced meals and treat yourself to indulge when you want to as well. And take a bubble bath if that's your jam, and walk 10,000 steps if you want to, but don't if you want to that day as well. All of those things are good for us, but they've been portrayed to us in the helping fields that that's the end all be all to feeling not burnt out, to feeling not stressed or overwhelmed, when in fact, those only are a band-aid. If we continue to show up to a workplace where things, we don't have that culture of compassion built in and we aren't able to tend to those things as part of our role, then it doesn't really do too much for us. Then the bubble bath gives us a fix for the 30 minutes that we're there, and the walk gives us a reprieve. But if we're continually showing up to the same stuff, it's not doing too much for us. So it's intentional that we don't do too much of that here in the toolkit. The next thing I want to point out here as we wrap up for today, so we'll be done a little early and I welcome any questions. As you scroll through the chat here, and as you heard people pop off mute, no one mentioned at work or serving the people that I work with as the thing where they feel most alive and most like themselves. Now, guess what? I have never once in my life done this presentation and had someone say at work. I don't say at work when I answer this question. But the idea here is 2 things. One, if I'm looking for us to build this culture of compassion or start shaping what a compassionate workplace might look like, And we have all of these wonderful things that people feel most alive and most like themselves. And I'm asking you to be compassionate to that person. How do we even begin to do so if I can't experience them being them full selves? And now I don't necessarily mean that like you all get out together to go weightlifting together or watch the Super Bowl together as a team or take a team bike ride. That might not be an option. But I bet even being able to share with each other what those things are helpful for us to get an understanding as to who the people we work with are. And the second thing is when you sit down at the end of the day at your dinner table, and maybe that's with your kids and your family, maybe that's with yourself or and your cat, maybe that's in silence, entirely alone, and that's okay too. But you reflect on what your day does. Some day was like, someone says to you, how was today? Usually our answers sound like fine, or it was good. And if something went wrong, then we talk about it. We reflect a lot on the things that went poorly throughout our day, the things that didn't bring us joy or didn't make us feel most alive. And now in our day-to-day jobs, it's not common that we get to experience the thing that make us feel most alive. But that feeling of joy, that feeling of being alive, I bet there's things in every single day that there's just a little smidge of what it feels like to be out on a bike ride or to be on the beach or walking with the dog. I bet there's a smidge of something that happens every day that gives you just a little bit of what that feeling is. And what if we actually reflected on that at the end of the day? How much more of a common practice or easier would it be for us to feel what it feels like to be alive in our jobs? Because it's just a common practice for us, right? So I'm not asking you to go out and ride bikes with your team, but I am asking you to think a little bit about like, can I find a nugget of joy in my day or a nugget of something that brought me similar feelings to what it feels like to do the thing when I feel most alive? And what could that do for yourself or your team culture if we were able to just have that small perspective shift, right? I'd love to close today. One of the other big practices here is gratitude. And I'm sure you hear that one all the time. It's one of the things that we do talk about quite a bit that is often talked about in the stereotypical way of self-care, but there's literal science behind it, folks. There's studies where they took folks where the only thing they changed about them was that at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, one of the two, at some point during the day, they asked them to write down 3 things they were grateful for that day. And it only took 7 days of writing down 3 things they were grateful for. So 21 items of gratitude for them to see statistically significant increases in their happiness, their overall well-being, and their kind of like lay state mood. All it took was 21 items of gratitude to see a statistically significant increase in their overall well-being. So please pop into the chat. What's something you feel grateful for today? Could be anything you'd like whatsoever. What's something you feel grateful for today to close this out? As that chat fills up, I'll just point out here again, our website is up on the screen. You can get in contact with anyone from our team by emailing wise@eliminatestigma.org. And you've got my own personal contact there too. Folks, my literal job is this. I get paid money to talk about this stuff with people. So please use me as a resource. I'm happy to meet with you if you want to think about how you can take this work further with your organization. I'm happy to meet with you if you want to think one-on-one what this could look like just for yourself. I'm happy to think about any and all of those things. So please reach out and use this as a resource. Like I said, they pay me good money to do it. And just a giant thank you to all of you for all of the relationships you build, all of the things you put into place, the support you give in order to make our community strong and the lives of its member better than they were the day before. I love to see this chat filled with gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we've got a little bit of time here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see y'all. If anyone's got any questions.
Anna, I just had one question regarding, finding one step you can take to set a boundary, back a few slides. Could you give an example, you know, of that, maybe specifically if someone is very empathetic or, you know, the one where you know, you say yes to everyone and then don't have time for yourself. Could you give an example of one step to take towards boundaries?
Yeah, totally. That's me. You're talking about me, Ashley. So thanks for holding me accountable. It's so common, particularly in the field that we all work in. We got here because we want to be able to say yes to other people. One thing that I try and talk with folks about is, and we didn't talk about it today, but it's the compassionate action steps. When someone comes to you and let's say they're experiencing some level of pain and they want your support or help in some capacity, the first thing we ask is that you take a look at your own self. What do you've got going on right now? And oftentimes, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but sometimes what we'll start to recognize is I don't got capacity in me to be able to effectively do the thing this person is wanting me to do. And the question I ask people that struggle with saying no is to really think about, is it more compassionate for you to be able to burn yourself out more, maybe do this project halfway that you normally would, maybe something else get dropped because you picked something else up? Is it more compassionate to do the thing they're asking you in that way than it would to be able to say, actually, you know what, Ashley, I've really got a lot on my plate right now. I want to support and help you. If we could talk about this next week, maybe I'd have more capacity, or if we could think about how we can work on this together. So two things there. One is to ask yourself, is it really more compassionate for me to do this in this manner? And two is you don't always have to say no. You can say no for now, or we could say yes and, or you can say whatever it might be. But that hard no is really challenging for folks who want to say yes. So it doesn't always have to be a hard no. It can be more of a, how do we come together to make this happen too?
I like that. Thank you. That was
Mhm.
very helpful.
Good.